Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of The Boys. A fantastic season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This is as I said, fantastic way to start off this season. Holy crap. Trailers didn't do it justice. This is definitely going to be the most twisted, jacked up, glorious, just messed up all around season, and I am here for it. First and foremost, like the moment that opening happening, I'm like, the opening happens and it's like the movie, and I'm like, oh god, is this going to be what I think it is? And it's like, oh, it's Stormfront. I'm like, okay, who did they get to play Stormfront? Who did they get? They didn't say it, but isn't that Charlize Theron? And is that supposed to be Charlize Theron as herself playing Stormfront, or is she playing an actress playing Stormfront? Whatever the case may be. I could be mistaken. That looked like that was Charlize Theron, which if it is, that's interesting timing because, you know, spoilers. She popped up in the one of the post-credit scenes for, or the mid-credit scene for Doctor Strange, so she's in the MCU, so that's just interesting, but regardless, and it's just like, oh god, this is so weird. I mean, the layers to it is so messed up because she's a full-blown, not like, oh, she's suspected of being a Nazi. It's like, no, she's a full-blown Nazi, and like, it feels weird where it's like, oh cool, you're making this movie about that, and it's just like, right, she was kind of seen a certain way. It feels, because apparently it's only been a year since season 2, so it feels icky that you're making a movie about that. It's like, it's one of those things where you're like, isn't this a little too soon? The fact that they had to rework the entire movie to kind of fit this narrative behind it and stuff like that, which is so funny when you think back in season 2 where they had the whole like, oh, girls get it done scene, and it makes it even crazier now because they have to we saw that from the production side of things when they were making the movie like last season, but still. And he's like, oh, I don't have to do. And I almost wonder, is this even more so a reference a little bit to like, oh, when they're like, oh, it's like, are you gonna have to do? You can't take me on alone or whatever. And they're like, he's not alone. And Maeve, Black Noir, Starlight, and A-Train show up. I don't know if that's supposed to be like a wink and nod to like Endgame in that regard of whether it's a Captain America situation or, once again, the girls get it done thing, kind of like, I think, a jokey commentary on like what people didn't like. People had the issues with like all the ladies on screen scene, which I don't know why people like, why that's the scene that always just like, when people bring up Endgame, that's the scene people just like harp on, which I think is kind of stupid. Regardless, I think that's what that was supposed to be, a little bit of like a jab and funny like jab at, but I almost wonder, like, is it supposed to almost be a parallel in that regard too? So they fight her, and I love that just in the theater you could see Homelander just sitting there just like, oh, grinding his teeth, and you just see Edgar, who's sitting beside Queen Maeve, who's just kind of like, because she was there during the actual fight with Stormfront, so that makes her feel weird. Starlight's just kind of like okay about it. And you can see Ashley in front being like, oh my god, she's so excited about it. I'm like, I love it. And I also love that, like, you know, cause we see it when during some of the interviews where Homelander has to, you know, talk about the whole, how did he not know about her being a Nazi and everything. And I love that at the same time, Edgar's like behind him in like one or two of the interviews, just staring at him. I'm like, oh, this is weird. This is so awkward. Oh god, hashtag release. Was it the Burke cut or whatever? I'm like, oh, shut up. Well, of course you're going to. And even then, it's like there's even more layers to that. Like, kind of a potential problematic hero being removed from a movie or whatever. I'm like, that's even more timely than even with the hashtag Burke cut, because it's like, right, there's the whole situation with, like, you know, not trying to compare, it's like not comparing the Nazi situation to this person's situation, but the whole Ezra Miller thing. It's like, oh, is Ezra Miller going to get replaced in the Flash movie? And it's like, I think news literally came out this week, maybe even today or yesterday, about like, apparently they're not going to. That's a whole thing. We're not going to get into that, but I think that's such a fascinating and just interesting timing how that worked out. I mean, it's even more like, even just aside, like, you know, obviously, you know, referencing the Justice League Snyder cut and everything, but even just aside from that, like that whole thing of just having to rework everything because of, you know, having to change things because circumstances, you know, the whole Stormfront of it all. It's so timely, even more so that I thought in that's fantastic. I mean, I guess it also plays into like, right, you know, celebrities getting canceled for stuff they've done or believe and stuff like that. So it leans into that, and it just happens to flow even more timely in the superhero realm in real life. So I think that's fascinating. I'm just harping on that so much, but I thought that was so fascinating. But I love just like, this is just like the episode of Homelander getting shit on, because he's just like, he's taking it. He has to take it from every angle, all the interviews, all the people questioning him, his popularity taking a dip, because they still are all about like, oh, they still tie him to Stormfront, which there's the Storm Chasers, which I'm like, oh, I was like, wait, is that what I think it's? Oh yeah, they're the people who are super all about a Stormfront's Nazi symbolism and rhetoric, and you're like, okay, that's definitely not going to help Homelander's image even more when people are still going to be like, oh, when it's like, oh, you have a group of neo-Nazis literally still supporting your ex-Nazi girlfriend. So you have that on top of everything else. Then he goes to a talk show, and it turns out the Deep went on before him. He was like, whoa, how'd you get a slot before me? He was like, what? Because he was so excited. He's like, oh, you should read my book about, oh, remember, Cassandra, this is my wife. We managed to escape the church and everything. I'm like, I love that. Really quickly, I also love that it's like, oh, the leader. It's like, oh, has anyone seen him? And so, publicly it's not known that he's dead. I'm like, did Victoria cover that up? Well, now in retrospect, now we know, jumping ahead a little bit, we do know Victoria gets stuff cleaned up. So that's probably the thing of like, after she killed him in the season 2 finale, she probably called someone in to clean it up. So no one probably does. Because I was wondering, like, did the church clean that up? But it's like, no, they probably set stuff in motion to be like, hey, make it seem like they're sending messages. He's like, oh, I'm on a vacation, or I'm going to be away for a while. Don't contact me. Or the church is the one that cleaned it up, because, like, right, having the head of your church dead is going to ruin the image a little. So maybe I'm leaning more towards it being Victoria that took care of that, but we'll have to wait and see. So, but yeah, I love how and just like Ashley the entire time is just kind of like, once again, she's so in the middle of everything, being like, no, it was a mess up, someone fucked up big time, and even the Deep being like, yeah, buddy, it was a major mistake, yeah, and he's like, thanks, Deep. I appreciate you saying that. He's like, yeah, no problem, sir. And Cassandra's like, what was that all about? He's like, I actually think that pretty well. So she's in the dark about all that's kind of going on there, because he's still trying to get back in the sevens. Obviously, he's still on the outs because they haven't filled, well, because obviously they gonna have to fill, well, because obviously she replaced Translucent to I guess Translucent or the Deep, because there was still an empty slot there. And so they still haven't, now they have to replace her and still fill the void from that 7th member, so. Speaking of Ashley, her and the director, Burke, I love the whole thing of like, and she's like, pull my hair. He's like, okay. She's like, no, pull it out. And he does, and they climax at the same time. I was like, oh God, that's so weird. Because all last season, well, a good chunk of last season, her hair was falling out because she was so stressed out. And it's just like, oh man, that's kind of become your kink now. That's how you come now. That's weird. That's crazy, dude. I was like, now that's part of your thing. And she's like, oh, you're a terrible director. He's like, yeah, I'm a terrible director. I'm like, oh, so you're one of those guys that's like, oh, like step on me, mommy type of guys. I'm like, hey, everyone's got their kink. It's like, man, once again, this show's so twisted. So there's that. Obviously, Huey still taking orders from, giving out orders actually to Butcher, who kind of isn't okay with, but he has to, follow things through, like the letter of like, right, got to file the paperwork, expenses and stuff, and take orders. So it's like, right. Which also really quickly about Huey, I love him being on kind of the red carpet, because obviously being Starlight's date, and they're like, oh, can we get a single? And it's like, oh, cool, yeah, let me relegate to the background. And then I bump into Homelander. Oh, that's awkward. Then A-Train's like, hey, who would have thought we'd be here, huh? It's like, what are you wearing? He's like, I have no idea. He's like, well, truth be told, I didn't give a fuck. I'm like, oh, who would have thought we'd be here? It's like, yeah, after you ran through my previous girlfriend at high speed, murdering her. So, yeah, who would have thought? So, oh, that scene is just so uncomfortable and awkward. But, yeah. Apparently Butcher isn't allowed to kind of go full-blown Butcher when it comes to taking down these heroes, and so they go after a hero named Termite. I think it's interesting timing, because obviously I just watched The Boys, God, what is it? The Boys presents Diabolical. Like, I'm always slipping that in my mind. I could always get Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, but I struggle with The Boys presents Diabolical. Regardless, there was episode 3 where you dealt with that OD, who was basically selling drugs to soups and stuff like that. And I made a comment about like, oh, it's interesting how we haven't really tackled that. It got brought up in season 1. I mean, I guess like the Compound V kind of filled that role, but more traditional. Well, I think it still filled that role, but like how the party scene in the superhero realm is like, we didn't tackle that too much. We kind of went into that in season 1, not as much in season 2. It was just only a little bit in season 1. So for it to kind of come back in this regard, I thought was interesting. Where Termite, who is essentially like obviously your Ant-Man equivalency, but also you can be Atom, but with the name Termite, it's more so Ant-Man. And so him like shrinking down and fucking like a doll or something like that. Then like him and his, I'm assuming boyfriend, significant other, that whole sequence of like the moment he's pulling his pants down, I was like, which way are we going with this? And the moment it seemed like I was like, oh, you're putting your penis on the table. Don't tell me you're gonna. No. I'm like, oh my god, this is happening. He shrinks and I was like, legitimately, I know there's all the memes about, there was the memes before Endgame came out of like, oh, Ant-Man can shrink down and go inside of Thanos' ass and explode him from the inside. Once again, they kind of even touched on that a tiny bit with the what if when Wasp went inside of zombie Sharon and exploded her from the, to some extent, right? It never crossed my mind before then to think about the application of the power in that way. And I referenced Adam, but Adam kind of, Ray Palmer kind of did a similar thing in Legends of Tomorrow too. Tangents aside, but I never once crossed my mind to think about like, oh, shrinking down and going inside someone's penis. Never thought about that, and just like for sexual reason. And I was like, and the moment he started sniffling, I was like, oh no, and he sneezed. I was like, oh god, it's like that's brutal. That's the second time we've seen that where someone's like caught up in ecstasy and ended up killing someone. First, it was A-Train's girlfriend crushing the guy that was eating her out in season 1, and now it's like this. It's like, oh god, that's brutal. I mean, soup sex is wild, dude. And then for Frenchie to walk in there, he's like, no, it's okay. And Termite doing his Ant-Man thing of shrinking down, tossing him around. He's like, oh, he's trying to go in my ass. And Kimiko getting him out. Luckily, Butcher was there to capture him and some cocaine, shaking it up. I was like, oh man, that bastard's about to OD. And Butcher was actually just going to squish him, but he was like, never mind, forget it. Turned the bastard on his side because he's about to OD. Because he's like, right, I'm not supposed to be killing any of these soups. We're supposed to be trying to do things the quote-unquote right way, as Huey says it. Which, speaking of, I love that Huey is a bit of a celebrity when it comes to the superhuman, like, bureau that they kind of work for. They kind of like the oversight committee to like soups and stuff like that that are part of the federal bureau. And I love he's kind of a bit of a celebrity. It's like, oh my god, he's the one that ended up taking down Stormfront, right? It's like, oh my god. And he's dating Starlight. It's like, oh my god, Huey, the nerd kind of loser of this team, is now like, oh my god, he's kind of a superstar in his own right, which is funny and interesting in its own right. I also thought that was super sweet. I was like, the moment like Kimiko was listening to that Lady Tyler singing, playing this on the song on the piano, and she was singing. I was like, I was like, wait, are you speaking now? And then I was like, it's all in her head, isn't it? And it's like, oh yeah. And then later on, she's playing the piano, like she's practicing, and just like Butcher's getting frustrated. He was like, I thought it was pretty good, and it's like, oh, and I love that it's so adorable when she's like about to start playing, and then she turns to see if Butcher's looking, and she starts playing. I'm like, I love it. You're so adorable, Kimiko. Hashtag protect Kimiko. She's too pure for this world. That's a long hashtag, but still. So there's all that. Speaking of the relationships and stuff like that, I do really love the Butcher stuff. Him and like getting connected for. I was like, oh, you're buying that for Ryan, aren't you? And the way he's so excited to play with him and everything. It's like, oh, did you do your homework? He's like, yeah, except for the math. Like, apparently Grace gets mad at him anytime he doesn't do it. But it's like, yeah, I hate it. You know, his mom was really good at it. It's like, yeah, your mom was super clever. But he has a nightmare, not just about what happened to his mom, but that his dad is going to pop up and kill everyone, find him, and then kill him. And I love what Butcher says, that one day you'll be strong enough that you're bigger and stronger than him, and that you'll never have to be afraid. Till then, Grace will protect you. And I thought that was beautiful because we know obviously last season, we learned about Butcher's relationship with his own father. He got big enough and strong enough that he could kick his dad's ass when necessary. So he doesn't connect with, so that line has so much weight behind it because it's like, right, Butcher knows from firsthand experience what it's like to be afraid of your dad, but to grow up and be stronger. But still, obviously, the power that your father could still have over you, despite how big you are or how strong you are. So I thought that was kind of a neat little moment between them. So, and even Butcher trying not to get too close to him because he's like, yeah, if I get too close to Ryan, I'm just gonna like fuck it up. But Grace is like, right, but the fact that you haven't been drinking, you haven't been killing soups, and who you been doing that for? I was wondering if it was for Becca, but he kind of looks towards Ryan. She's like, see? So maybe you're not the asshole, as much of an asshole as I thought you were, Butcher. But I think it's like, yeah, but he's also keeping a promise to Becca, like, right, protecting Ryan. He sees who Ryan is. It's like, right, you may be a soup, but you're not your dad. You're more Becca than anything. So he still probably sees the woman he loves in that kid. So it's like, right, having a piece of her still around, it's what she would have wanted. And the fact is, where he was at the end of the season, where he could have gone either way, whether he could have tried to hurt Ryan or ended up protecting him, but to see him where he is now, where he actually is concerned about the kid, he worries about him. I think that is such a beautiful element to that relationship, and I think they've just been spending more and more time together over the past year, and I thought that was so dope. And I thought was really interesting. Obviously, his daughter's birthday party, him and his ex obviously not being together anymore, and it's like, oh yeah, like the new guy in their lives coming in for the photo, and it's like, no, you guys go ahead and take the photo together. It's like, that's weird. And he's trying, he's telling Monique, no, I'm good. Like, you've seen me for the past 12 months. It's like, oh, maybe we should talk about co-parenting. And she's like, oh, at the place where we're dating. And it's like, oh, she's saying, like, you should move on. He's like, oh, like you did? And he's like, I'm sorry. Like, a lot of people kind of putting their own foots in their mouths this episode already, like Huey and the Starlight thing, which we'll get to, as well as the and Monique thing. And it's just, he's saying, like, right, I've put that superhero stuff, that's behind me. It's like, still going to rub you a certain way, especially when the new guy in their life shows up and that's Homelander. That's going to rub you the wrong way. Like, your daughter dressing up as Starlight is kind of fine. You spent time with Starlight. You know how cool and, like how dope Starlight is. But Homelander's another, thing. But jumping ahead a little bit, I do like that we see that hasn't let it go. He claims not to have, and the moment, like, because I was hoping, and I talked about this in my trailer discussion. I'm trying to remember, did I call MK? I don't know if I called him MK or did I call him MM in the or mother, or did I just call him full name Mother's Milk? I don't remember what I referred to him as, but. Last season, we touched on the fact is he talked a little bit about the reason why he's in this fight against Supers, because it's kind of a family thing. It was his father's fight before him, and he said at the time, he was like, I don't want to get into it, but some shit went down. I'm assuming, now that we learn a little bit about Soldier Boy, just a tiny bit in this, we learned that Soldier Boy died in, like, apparently the 80s. I would have thought he would have died sooner, supposedly. So, it makes you go, like, okay, so it's Soldier Boy, because he has a lot of articles. There's others, like, obviously there's the one about Robin, there's about a family in Queens or something, so I'm assuming, but there were a few articles about Soldier Boy. So I'm like, is Soldier Boy who he has the biggest issue with? Is that something where Soldier Boy did some like effed up stuff, and it led to it, like, it was his dad particularly took up this fight, and that ultimately ended up, did like Soldier Boy kill him? Did his father like run himself into the ground because maybe like he drove himself insane working this? Maybe could have been like, oh, could have ended up on the streets addicted to drugs. Like, we didn't get the full story of what happened to MM's dad. We just know that this was his fight, and MM's got that itch. He promised, like, Monique is like, oh, I've let it go. It's like, no. Like, either he's still looking into this, but it seemed like he's doing it on his own, because I think it is a personal vendetta, just like Butcher can't walk away. And I love that whole conversation that Huey has with Butcher. It's like, right, you're upset that me and MM left. He's like, I'm more upset about MM. You, not as much. But it's like, it's okay to move on. But for Butcher, it's like, no. Like, each one of them is being driven. Even if Huey's like trying to pretend like, oh, he's moved on because he's with Starlight, at the heart of it, Robin will still be the reason why this all started for you. Everyone's got their personal demons and reasons why they're mixed up in this fight. Obviously, we learned about Frenchie, the whole Grace situation and her grandchildren. Like, that's ample motivation for him to still be in the fight. I do like that we also got Huey's dad back, just for even if it's just this one scene, and it's just like, oh yeah, like my dentist is a big fan of Starlight, so I gave him your number. It's like, what, Dad? Why would you do it? It's like, Dad, you gotta back up. It's like, I'd probably be the same way. I don't use FaceTime. It's just not my cup of tea. I'm the antisocial person that I am. But I was like, oh, once again, the timing is interesting because I just watched The Boys Presents Diabolical, where Simon Pegg voiced Huey in episode 3 of it. So I was like, oh, I like how that ultimately all ended up working out like that. So, I mean, granted, obviously he was already in the show beforehand, but still, it was just nice timing, just me having started that and finished it, and now this. But, oh, and then we also have all the Edgar stuff this episode. It's just like, man, every time your boy Giancarlo Esposito is in the scene, it's like, man, he's always chews up the scenery. And he's talking to Bob about, it's like, all right, we're working on Compound. We're working on V24 because they have to do a little rebranding. Because he's like, I can't bring this to the Senate because Compound V is forever staying because you had a Nazi pushing it. And it's like, yeah, people are always going to associate that. I mean, it doesn't help when you have a movie kind of pushing that narrative even more so, even after a year. So it's like, that's going to be the thing, right? But it's about getting it out there. And I love that Edgar closes the door, and I love how slow it closes. He's like, I'm going to be frank with you. I'm planning on getting out of the superhero business after 5 years. He's like, what? No. It's like, right, these superheroes, he's basically like, Vought has become a daycare rather than being the pharmaceutical company it's always meant to be, because that's their bread and butter. Superheroes is just kind of icing on the cake, but really being a pharmaceutical company is their, Compound V is their true biggest asset. Once again, not Homelander, even though he likes to believe himself to be that. But for Edgar, it's like, nah, screw that. Like, I'm gonna bail out with you. Bob's like, there's no way you're actually doing it. He's like, no, we're gonna do that. Like, this company strayed so far from what it was going to be. All we're doing is placating superheroes, the movies, the advertisement, covering up all the stuff they done, the dead prostitutes. It's just one thing after another. And so he's like, right, the difference being is your soldiers, they're well trained, but also they'll only be soups for 24 hours or so. So it's a little bit of a more manageable situation, because it's like, right, you can't really say much to people who are super 24/7. So thought that was interesting. Then the conversation between him, Starlight, and Homelander. And I love that situation where they're both circling around the table and Homelander tries to pick up his pace, but Edgar sits down in his seat, so he has to sit down on the other side. And Edgar's like, cool, I want you to be co-captain. And she's just like, no, I don't want to do it. I mean, he's an actual captain and so on and so forth, so I don't want that to be the case. It's like, no, like, this should happen. And because apparently out of anyone, like, she's brought superheroism back to the positives, because her ratings are like 96. No one has such a high rating, but she was even like, no, you should give it to Queen Maeve. Obviously, she's been on the team longer and stuff, but it's like, yeah, because, I mean, to be fair, it doesn't matter. Homelander hates both of your guts, so it wouldn't matter between Queen Maeve or Starlight. It still would have been, like, severely pissing him off, because like everything's being taken from him. That's the thing. He's like, I give and I give, and I take and they take and they take. I've done all I could. I've apologized multiple times, and I'm still losing everything. I can't make things right, And he's like, Edgar's like, oh, you want to talk about this more? I'd love to too. How about we reschedule this convo? And he's like, let me talk to Starlight alone. And I love that Starlight, he closes the door, and Starlight's like, he can still hear us. He's like, oh yeah, I know he probably can. I actually hope he can still hear us. The fact of the matter is, basically Edgar like shooting it straight up, being like, right, it isn't about the power, like, oh, you're superpowered. What really is the power is being able to bend the world to your will. Like, think about all the power you can have as co-captain. Fight for the causes that you really want to fight for. Even having a say on who joins the team, she could turn this, have a big part in turning the 7 around. Yes, her and Black Noir probably not going to be on the best terms. Her and A-Train, they're mixed on where they are, but her and Maeve are more on the positive side of things, and if she has more say on it, she could get more people in the 7 that she believes and backs up, and thinks that, she can turn things around. That ends up being a conversation she has with Huey about that, which for Huey, it's like, no, it's Vought. Like, he's kind of a little pessimistic, because he's like, well, for one, Homelander will kill you, But for her, it's like, I could do so much good. Like, she's bled. She's done so much to get to where she is. And if I have that opportunity to, even if Vaught's evil, if I can do some good and change it from the inside out, then it's for the betterment. But I think Huey, the pessimist in him, you know, he wants to be optimistic, and he is in many regards. But I think with just how effed up everything Vought related is, it's like, no, you're literally already in the belly of the beast. You're literally sitting side by side in the lion's cage, sitting beside the lion that is Homelander. So Huey's not all about it, and he always obviously, like, the whole Supersonic or whatever his name is, her ex, like, that's rubbing him the wrong way, that she's doing this reality show and they've got so many stories together. And I love her joking with him. It's like, oh yeah, plus we did a whole bunch of butt stuff, and Huey was like, almost like, what? And she's like, oh, fuck me. He's like, yeah, don't do that again. So the relationship's a little rocky there. I mean, obviously he cares about her, but once again, another person putting their foot in their mouth when it comes to relationship stuff. But I also love the Homelander and A-Train thing, where he's poking at A-Train and like, oh, look at you getting fat, because he's like, he's got to feel superior to somebody. He's like, let me remind you who's really running this show. And so he ends up, I love A-Train's like, man, fuck you. He's like, what'd you say? He's like, nothing. Grabs him. He's like, say it. He's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, man, the guy is a ticking time bomb. He's already slipping. He's already going ape shit already. He's just barely holding it together. I mean, to be fair, he's been sitting on this for like a year, just like grinding his teeth, putting on that smile. He can't even help himself. It's like, he can't help himself. He's reaching his breaking point. Which Maeve, we end up finding out, is contacting Butcher because Huey had asked what Butcher's source was early on. It never crossed my mind to be like, oh, of course it'd be Maeve. But I guess I never thought that they would work together. But it's like, right, we both hate Homelander's guts. I have a means of finding a way to kill him. Because they find out about Soldier Boy, which I like, oh, okay. Because my thought was, based on the trailer, I was thinking, like, are they going to find Soldier Boy and awaken him because they need him to kill Homelander? But it's like, no, they're under the impression Soldier Boy died in the 80s. Like, basically, like, some reactor went off and he died in that. Which she's saying, like, yeah, it's kind of BS, because she's finding out there's actually a weapon that potentially killed Soldier Boy, and if they can find a weapon that killed Soldier Boy, who is still on the same level as Homelander, if it could kill him, it could kill Homelander too. Granted, once again, he's not dead. Not unless we end up finding out. Once again, I've only seen episode 1, because once again I do these one at a time. But either that, maybe Soldier Boy was hit with a weapon that could hurt him, but he's been in healing this entire time. Maybe they've kept him on stasis as they try to resuscitate him and cure him from, like, the injury from this. I don't know. But maybe it's just like, yeah, don't fuck this up. It also kind of, we touch on it a little bit, so it's like, wow. So Black Noir's been around a hot minute, because he was part of a team called Payback. I wonder how many soups don't age. Because Soldier Boy was a part of that, and he supposedly died in the 80s, and I'm granted we don't see Black Noir, much of his face in the show, but also the rest of his team, not less, they're older now too, because I was about to say, we know Stormfront aged slower, so that might just be her, because that's why, well, Soldier Boy say might be more so like he was in stasis the entire time for the past, like, 30-ish, 40 years, you know, so maybe that's the only reason why he looks the same, because I think Stormfront not aging was kind of a more her thing, but still. And she's the one that gives him the temporary V, the V24, because it's like, right, the rest, because, what was it, Payback, there's 2 members of Payback, which one was Soldier Boy's sidekick, and the other one was, like, his girlfriend or whatever, who they were sleeping together at the time. So she's like, you got to go to them and get some information out of them, because they're the only ones who will know what actually happened to Soldier Boy. So could be the only opportunity to kill Homelander. And it's like, yeah, you think I'd really want to become you guys? It's like, if you want to kill Homelander, then yes, like, you're going to put your issues with being a soup, even though it's temporary, aside. Once again, this is still R&D, so it's still a gamble on whether it 100% works. So who knows what the after effects are going to be, so. But I was also surprised by the visit that Homelander had with on him. And he's asking about Ryan, and it's like, no, I'm not going to tell you where he is. If you're going to like laser me in my brain, very much like Madeline. Go ahead and do it. He's like, no, that'd be too easy. It'd be like putting down a weakened dog. You know, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. He's kind of like, what's the fun in that? And I love that him and Butcher are parallel to each other. He even makes the point that we're basically relegated, whether it's by VIDS or the Bureau, we're relegated to like being these antiquated machines in cogs in this machine. And even Butcher recognizes, yeah, it is kind of effed up, but it's like, oh, but you and me, we have this destiny of us going toe to toe, and only one of us is going to survive. And Butcher's all about, he's like, fucking right. And he's like, yeah, so because I was wondering if he was trying to say like, oh, this could help us in the long run. Either it's like, hey, you get to take me down, but if I win this fight, it's just going to help my reputation because, hey, I'm taken down. Maybe it's like, right, this is all we have going for us. Everything else has been taken from us. Let's go toe to toe. This could be our like, let this be our everything, this grand battle that's going to eventually happen, you know, the clashing between us. So that's definitely going to be interesting. Obviously, that's going to be a big crux of this season. I'd skipped over it. I was actually surprised we actually got to see any Stormfront, because there's a point later on, once again, kind of spoilers because of the trailer, but he's laying in a bed and there's a blood spot. So I'm like, okay. So I was like, oh, did she die and that's why he's there? Which she could end up dying, or maybe he ends up killing her. But he's like going to her and it's like, oh, she's recovering at least a little bit. Not nearly as messed up as she was, but even a year later, she's still pretty bad off. I'm surprised they haven't gotten her like some prosthetics or something. It seems like her right arm is still going along with both of her legs. And she's still pretty damaged like that. And it's like, oh, I'll make you feel better. She holds out her hand. I'm like, oh, you want to hold hands or something? And then he starts unzipping his. I was like, oh, okay. Okay, he's up there complaining. He's like, oh, like, I'm a win. And she's like, yeah, you're going to lead, like, the Aryans and stuff like that. And he's like, what? No. So I'm like, okay. So Homelander was in love, but he was never really too keen on the whole Nazi thing. It seemed like there were certain points last season where it seemed like, it's hard to say whether you're 100% on board with this, or are you simply in love with this because they love you, that she loves you so much that she's putting you on such a high pedestal, like, oh, you're the one, you're so special. He's even saying like, no, I should be the only master race. Like, I'm not trying to be the leader of like a master race. Like, no, I am the master race. So, and I guess he kind of loses his erection and he's just kind of like, yeah, I'll see you later, and just kind of leaves. So now for her, she's laying in the bed, now it's like, oh, wait, I put you on a pedestal. You're supposed to be our crowning achievement. I waited 100 years to find you or whatever, and it kind of didn't. After 100 years or something, we found you, and you kind of want nothing to do with it because he's selfish. He only cares about himself. Like, no, I'm number one. I have to be special, because that's why, like, early on when all those photos were getting taken of him on the red carpet, and then it all switched over to Starlight, which obviously, once again, it's beef with Starlight. But then you add in the fact is of like, no, that's supposed to be my spotlight. Yeah. He wants to be loved. He needs to be loved. And I guess it's like, oh, being a Nazi Aryan person is like, no, that's not, no, go get me love. I was down for it before because you loved me. You're trying to put me on a pedestal where people would rally behind me. But it's like, I loved you too. So that's only reason why it's like, you kind of commit to like, it's like, oh, you're into country music? Yeah, I'm super into country music. I'm not trying to equate the two, but I'm trying to make a comparison of like, yeah, maybe you pretend that you're into something that you're not. Maybe that's what all of last season really was for him, just because he was so in love with her, or is it just because more so that rather than being in love with her, it's because she was so in love with him? Once again, put him on such a pedestal. So we'll see how that plays out. Like I said, whether she just dies of natural causes, or once again whether she gets full-blown Darth Vader, because people were wondering if that was going to happen to her. If it happens, it will happen later, because it sure as hell hasn't happened now. Or does he decide to kill her just because it's like, right, I can't have a remnant of the past around anymore, in more ways than one? So we'll see how that plays out. Starlight does ultimately agree to the whole co-captain thing, which once again just stuck the dagger in deeper, because it all came down to like the board already voted on it. It just needed to wait for Starlight to say yes. So there's that. Then there's the whole situation with Newman, where like that guy Tony kept showing up calling her naughty, and I was like, oh, interesting, someone from the past. And she eventually catches up with him, and then Shuey follows her, and he was about to say something, but then she acknowledged like, hey Tony. I'm like, Oh, God. I was surprised. I was like, oh, wow. Huey's finding out this early in the season about Victoria? I was like, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting him to find out this soon. Holy, I mean, now it's heartbreaking because, like, right, him and Victoria had those moments over the course of the season. They've been working so hard together. Collateral damage or, like, Soup's causing people to get hurt have been down 60%. It's like, right, we're a real well-oiled machine this past year, and it made him, I think that's why he kind of feels like, oh, I'm getting justice for Robin, because now there's never going to be another Robin. We're helping save so many people's lives. Might kind of be a slow and steady battle, but we are winning, which honestly, Butcher was like, fuck no, we're not winning. Like, that's stupid. Like, their Soups have all the power and all the money to kind of sweep anything under the rug, and they're still able to get away with all the shit that they do. We're still tackling small fry while the big fry still get to do whatever they want. But Tony's referencing something, what was it, Red River? But for whatever reason, Newman doesn't want to bring it up. So it turns out Tony's also superpowered as well. But he kept pushing her. It's like, no, please, you have to do this. And she was going to pop his head, but he saw what she was going to do and he fought her off. We've never seen the slow process of what she's able to do. I guess she has to really, really focus on, like, your head to make it all explode all at once. I guess it's almost like a lock-on special ability. You have to really, really focus. Because at first she blows off the fingers on his hand, which super bloody, gory, and meaty. Then she blew off, like, half of his mouth and everything. You're like, ugh! And he's still alive, gurgling, and you're like, oh. And she's like, why'd you have to find me? And then she explodes the rest of his body, and then she calls someone to clean up. So, and Huey's just shaking because it's like, right, this was a friend, this is an ally, and now you find out everything's complete and utter bullshit. Not only is she a Soup, she's not a good Soup, she's a killer. So, and also, now Huey can equate to, oh man, everyone whose head popped last season, Reynolds included, but everyone in the courtroom last season, that was all her. So, yeah. So many fascinating things. I'm so happy to have the boys back. Obviously, episodes 2 and 3 are already out as well. So I'm going to jump on those after the fact. Once again, one at a time. But I'm so excited to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.